Silo has shifted into the next phase of events, from the death of a sheriff to that of many more. Finally, we have ourselves in the phase of relics that contain the answer to the mysteries that lie beyond the silo, maybe the existence of life itself. And just like the beginning of any phase, we find out about new stuff that the judiciary wouldn't want anyone to come across. Silo episode 6 is slow and tests our patience till the very end, but we can accept that because we have made it halfway through. Now we have to see how Juliet finds out about George's death and Silo's secrets. Spoilers ahead. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Silo episode 6 begins with Juliet and her deputies, including Paul Billings, breaking into Doug Trumbull's place to look for any strange evidence. Strangely, Paul finds the same relic that Juliet had at the end of episode 5. So, it seems that she planted it there so that she could link it to Doug Trumbull and carry out an investigation accordingly. We must remember that she doesn't know that it was Doug who killed George, but she can easily hold Doug responsible for George's murder. But she cannot investigate on her own, and thus she and Paul bring the relic to Judge Meadows after he reminds Juliet that keeping a relic without the judiciary's permission is a criminal offense. Meadows doesn't seem to be interested in a closed case but appears unwell. She lets Sims proceed with the meeting and Juliet's proposal to start an investigation into the death of George Wilkins. Juliet shows Meadows the relic, but it is Sims who takes it from her. Sims is the one who does the talking, and we can tell that even though he doesn't like Juliet looking into George's death, he has to show that he cares. A reason for this is that Juliet knows that Sims and Doug were connected, so Sims has to acknowledge Juliet's claim to avoid being judged. But even then, he drops a subtle statement that puts Juliet in the circle of suspicion as well. After all, she is wearing a relic that belongs to someone else who is no more, George's watch that, as we find out, she fixed for him. However, Juliet is allowed to carry out the investigation, but she has to take Paul Billings along. Despite the image that I personally had of Paul Billings before he was introduced, he appears to be a guy who isn't controlled by Sims or the judicial, for that matter. Well, now that they have the green light, Juliet and Paul visit Patrick Kennedy yet again. This time, he gives them the name Regina Jackson. Meanwhile, back in his office, Sims, who had the relic with him, searches the digital archives and comes across George Wilkins. Juliet and Paul visit Regina Jackson and find out that she is George's ex-girlfriend. Regina reveals that George didn't have sanctioned relationships. He used Regina's family's influence to get hold of relics that would otherwise be tough to get one's hands on. The reason George never chose to have sanctioned relationships is perhaps because he didn't want to put the life of his partner at risk or compromise his mission. This, in turn, means that it has been a long time since he began analyzing relics. But more than George's intention, it is the fact that he never mentioned Regina to Juliet that affects Juliet. George used Regina, and from what she says about him, it seems that George lied about his feelings for Juliet as well. The mere possibility that this could be true comes as a shock to Juliet. Once back at her office, Juliet faces questions from Sims and Bernard regarding the relic that belonged to George Wilkins, her friend. She states that, besides the watch she is wearing, she didn't receive any relics from George. So, the question of how it miraculously turned up in Doug's quarters is not hers to answer. That's when Bernard, to our surprise, questions Sims about the possibility of Trumbull, who was a member of the judicial team that searched George's room, finding the relic and taking it back to his place. Sims is clearly upset with how a member of the judicial team is being judged based on a hunch. He doesn't want an investigation into the matter as it can lead back to him. By this time, Paul has realized that it was Juliet who planted George's relic in Doug's quarters. Although he doesn't open up to Sims or Bernard about the relationship between Juliet and George, he is very angry at her. She has risked his career for her own sake. Although it was wrong, we can tell why she did it. It's because she knew that Sims, being Paul's handler, wouldn't doubt Paul. But if Juliet and Paul are to work together, they will need to be honest with each other. And this means that Paul should accept that he has the syndrome, which itself is enough to cost him his job. So, we see that both Juliet and Paul have their share of secrets that can get their badges snatched away. So either they can work together or be sent off together. After leaving the office, Juliet meets Lucas, and they have a little conversation while Paul returns to his family, worried for obvious reasons. Not only does he not want the word about his syndrome to spread, but he also wants to ensure that he hasn't passed on his disease to his baby. Juliet decides to resign and tells Martha the same. Juliet remembers what Regina told her, and maybe George really isn't the person she thought he was. But Martha makes her realize that she took up the job out of love, and she cannot let her anger force her to give up. She has to prioritize her role as a sheriff over her anger for being wrong. Juliet returns to Regina's place and confronts her about giving up George to the judicial. Maybe Juliet had a hunch, and saying it to Regina's face works its charm, but partly, it's not the judicial that she gave up George and all the other relic dealers to, but someone else, a man who threatened to hurt everyone she ever knew. According to Regina, the reason George is dead is because he didn't hand over the hard drive. But what matters now is what he gave her in return for the drive, a file that has been passed down generations in George's family. The file is from before the silo. Baby Regina realized that both of them share the same pain of being misused and decided to help Juliet. Inside the file is a magazine with pictures of forests, oceans, beaches, and sunsets. Juliet doesn't know what to make of it, but if we place ourselves in her position, we realize how scary it is to know for a fact that there was a time when all the pictures in the magazine were real. Silo episode 6 ends with 2 guards observing her on one of the many screens in front of them, and one of them heads back to report to his boss. Whoever that is, probably the guy who Regina was talking about. Also, Bernard is surely planning something with Sims. Hopefully, Silo episode 7 will reveal if Bernard or Sims know this new mysterious guy and how he is related to all that's happened of late in the Silo. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and I hope you enjoyed the Silo story. Thanks for watching.